and welcome to Comfort.ai, making artificial intelligence your comfort zone. I am so excited to be joined by Glen Willoughby today on this episode of Ethics Talks, talking about AI ethics and ethics and technology in general. Glen, thank you so much for joining me. Do you want to give us an intro about yourself?
No, thanks, Saba. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and particularly one of my favourite topics, being AI. I'll look a bit about myself. Probably the most interesting things, I'm trying to reduce my golf score, and I'm trying to take up the guitar. That's probably about the most interesting thing I do in my day. My real job is the chief executive of Nilo Global, which is a circular economy technology company based here in New Zealand, in the UK and also in the US. And our offices are not far from here in Takapuna. In addition to my day job, I do some work in the health sector around AI research, space exploration, and more latterly, US defence use of AI.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Which makes me sound like an expert, but far from it. I'm still learning.
I am sure you are an expert, just being humble, but thank you. So, as mentioned, this session is about talking about AI ethics. So I think the first question would be, just tell us a little bit about what your take on ethics in general is.
I tend to look at AI and ethics really simply. I think there's two parts to ethics. One, with any new technology, what is the best we can do to help humanity? The second part of ethics are what are the gotchas that we just got to be aware of, the ones that are easy to identify, but more importantly, what are the unintended consequences that are much harder to project? I find the old ethical models, whether it's health ethics, research ethics, don't really apply to AI. It's such a large and new field and incredibly transformational technology that it's new ground. Nearly every bit of AI is new ground. In the same way that nuclear technology in the 40s was very new ground. The 1800s and the Industrial Revolution and the impact positively and negatively that had on countries was new. This is our version of that, and it is new. We're all learning as we're going.
Yeah, that is very true. That is very true. So I think touching on that exactly, I think as you were talking, I just came up with so many different questions, but I think the most favorite one that I'm going to pick is, what is it you think that we can learn from these two previous industrial revolutions and our kind of ethical learnings from those and the unintended consequences and the positive stuff that happened that we can apply?
I think the only real piece takeaway that I get from those two experiences in history, which of course we weren't a part of, is the impact on people. So if we take the Industrial Revolution, the impact on productivity, the way in which it changed people's lives and gave them new tools, new resources, new appliances, overall was a hugely positive time in global history. Not reported so well was the impact to the previous jobs that were there. A lot of jobs went by the wayside, and there were generations of people that were negatively impacted from an employment perspective. So AI, very similar to those examples. You get lots of positive comment around how it's going to change the world.
Yeah.
You equally get the pendulum swing, a bit like nuclear technology. What's all of the bad things? And with any new aggressive change in technology, becomes very polarized to the first few steps. How we move forward is having one discussion which is focused on the positive and the negative, but centered around what does this mean for people. And the research over the last 5 years with a couple of groups that I'm involved in, it's taken us a good 3 years to get to the people component, to get through the norming and storming and floundering and not quite sure where we're all going, to what is the stuff that actually matters? And what actually matters is what's the impact on people? What's the good? What's the bad? And how do we move in a measured way?
Do you think we're moving fast enough?
Technology will move faster than we can cope with, particularly this technology. So AI is not new, or machine learning is not new. It's been around for a long time. What is new is the power and the tools that gives it an amazing scope for change and impacting people's lives. So if we looked at quantum computing, which is really, in my simple view, just code for massive processing power, that plus pure AI technologies creates a very different thing that can be applied in so many ways. Quantum computing only 7 years ago was a myth.
True.
Now you can buy a D-Wave for $100,000 and you've got more processing power than the entire globe had in the 1970s. So I think the technology will move at pace. Where the friction becomes is human change can only go at a certain pace. And it's how we mold the two together and be realistic around what change is appropriate. I first got introduced to AI probably 7 years ago. Back then I couldn't even spell AI. And from then to now, partway through that was DeepMind's Go.
Yeah.
You saw a rapid increase in technology, which is only getting exponential as a curve. If you ask the general population, what is AI, you tend to get Terminator and their varying fictional views around what AI is. If you look at human ability to adapt and government's ability to manage it, the Cambridge Analytica is a great negative example. Even those well connected in the AI community were still stunned around how you could socially engineer outcomes based on data. It's easy to look back and go, oh, that's pretty obvious now. But where we find ourselves in terms of change and somewhat unmanaged change is a lot of our lives are very codified. A lot of the data sets that governments, private companies have are now extremely deep. So I would sort of argue that we have a lot of focus on great opportunities for the future, negative risks for the present, and examples of good and bad as isolated case studies. The real crux, I think, is what data is available, how deep is that data, where is that data, and what can you do with that data. And that's the bit that was missing around Cambridge Analytica. So I think we're in this storming phase. If we take a typical data maturity model, which we all learned when we went to data science school at university, data progresses from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. We're still in the data frame of feeling our way with this technology. And like a lot of technologies, it can be used for both good or bad, which makes the ethical dilemma particularly important. Organisation I've had some involvement with, NASA Ames Research Centre in Mountain View, just south of San Francisco. It's where NASA does the majority of its AI long-run research. And one of the first mechanisms they put in place was an ethics forum. I think that insight around this is a vastly different technology with vastly different applications was a really smart insight. So the ethics framework for me is step one, create a forum that focuses on it, particularly if you're a large enterprise, whether you be government or private. Smaller ones, a bit hard to do that, but the data sets of larger organizations can be much more powerful and much riskier. So a foundation of ethics, I think, is quite important.
Is that link available publicly?
No.
Okay.
No. The organizations involved in the AI research is not public. It's not because it's secretive around what they were doing. With a number of government partnerships, NASA just happens to be one government entity. There are a range of third-party private organisations that need their IP protected, and that's predominantly the reason for the security around it. Other than that, NASA's a very public place. You can find and see a lot.
Yeah, true. So you raised a few good points that I think some of the viewers may not be familiar with, concepts like quantum computing, programs like DeepMind. So I would make sure to include links in the bio of this video for anyone who wants to dive a little bit deeper into what these things are. But to come back to your point about AI ethics, and you raised some really good points. You have a very kind of wide experience across different industries. Now, when it comes to AI ethics, what I normally tend to see is, and this is from my kind of personal experience, not some kind of data that I've collected from somewhere, but it's either people in the tech sector or people in the legal sector. So what do you think that we can learn from, the cross-industry collaboration, health sector, for example, or the financial industry or the education industry? What do you think that we can do or learn from this cross-collaboration when it comes to AI ethics?
I think the experiences of other sectors create good insights, the good and bad experiences. If we just look at New Zealand as a country, being able to gather those experiences and understand what does that mean, what's it telling us, that in of itself puts us much further ahead than many countries. So in terms of industry collaboration, I think it's a case studies and it's a stories and it's a learning. I think for individual organizations, ethics and AI isn't a technology issue. If I look at 3D printing, for argument's sake, that's very much a technology issue. It's a technology niche that can have a range of applications that can improve engineering and design, and no doubt a number of other sectors. AI is not that. AI is a completely new discipline. It's a bit like, as I said earlier, electricity or nuclear energy turning up, and it has to be treated like that. So the sooner we can learn from whatever else is going on, the better our insights, the better our understanding from an ethics and a for human good behaviour. What do we need to be doing? What do we need to be wary of? And how do we govern it? The sheer absence of that, which isn't a criticism, it's just where everyone is in terms of its maturity of understanding it. We've still got a long, long way to go. It's very easy to do malicious things first. Malicious things have zero constraints. So when a new technology pops up, those ones tend to move faster. If you look at banking, cybercrime, Cambridge Analytica is a negative example. Those things are always going to pop up first because they're unconstrained. If you look at the use of AI in health, which is one of the research areas we're running here in New Zealand, there is a large clinical governance and government set of mechanisms to manage anything new effectively which you need. And that's not just with information technologies or AI, it's pharmaceuticals, it's clinical practice. So there's an infrastructure there to look at how changes can be managed within. As a result, the for good stuff, such as health, will go at a slower pace. So if we looked at AI in similar terms as the doomsday clock, 1 o'clock to 12 o'clock, we're sort of about 1:30 in terms of our understanding, I would argue. Our speed to get from 0 to 1:30 in the morning over the last 5 years has been staggering in terms of pace. So I expect our understanding will grow at that same pace as the technology does. So ethics for me is less around technology. It's more a fundamental question around, for something that's so new, what are the mechanisms to increase our understanding of it? And similar to NASA aims, on day one, what's a structure we should put in place to consider what we're learning and how we can be managing or governing those things. I know very few organizations that have gone to that type of step, which isn't a criticism, it's new.
Yeah.
So I think if we reviewed 3 years from here, we'll have a fairly mature governance and ethics arrangement in a number of large companies. It's just early days at the moment, which is why the conversation is really important. And it's why, harking back to NASA Ames, one of their first steps was AI ethics. So I think ethics is a good first place to start, as well as how fast can you increase your learning curve, which is sharing knowledge and sharing experiences.
So I'm going to ask it's not a dumb question, but it's, I don't know, it's probably a question that you might get often. So what we know of NASA, like when I think about NASA, I think about, sending, rockets to space and, landing rovers on Mars and going to the moon. And so, but when you're talking about NASA Ames, you're saying that the first thing that they put in place was, ethics, ethics of AI. What does NASA do that can have like a impact on people who aren't going to the moon? That they saw this AI ethics being
Very
one of the
good
fundamentals.
So how about we try and answer that question with an example?
Yeah.
So let's park NASA Ames for a minute. So NASA Ames is the long-run research facility of NASA, and look at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. Their task is to look at deep space research, which fundamentally is anything beyond the moon. But they also do probably 50%, give or take, of their work is around Earth science and looking inward on our planet. So park the long-range research, and if we just look at a NASA mission. So one mission at NASA that has only recently landed, Perseverance, which is the next Mars rover, and Ingenuity is the helicopter that is just a trial and pilot that went along for the ride. The last time JPL landed a rover was 2011, a long time ago, 10 years ago. This time around, as Perseverance was embarking on its landing, a LiDAR technology, just like a radar technology, was coupled with AI solution, so it could assess its environment and pick the safest place. Where 10 years ago, it was not quite hope for the best, but there was very little risk management that could be done apart from the stellar design that was done for that mission. So simple things and simple technologies that reduce risk, that make the mission go better and go faster, is how I've observed NASA apply their technologies. Give you another example. So what does that mean for us here on Earth? The technologies to do something that's never been done before, which is a lot of what NASA does, creates technologies that can be transferred into other sectors. So one technology that was worked on quite some time ago was how to track asteroids. Not just ones that can hit our planet, but asteroids around our solar system. It's not a difficult AI task as long as you've got a lot of great data. So it's looking at patterns and trying to form and predict an outcome. Relatively simple AI task. You can translate that to look at cancer detection. And here in New Zealand, we're running a breast screening cancer detection based on some of the technologies that were being used at NASA. Why is that important? Our population is growing, our cancer prevalence is going, our clinical workforce is under some fairly serious stress, the OECD over, and it takes, broadly speaking, 14 years to become proficient in reading a breast screening image. So the ways of the past are just not sustainable. You don't replace it completely with AI, but you allow new technologies to shift some of the workload under a human quality managed umbrella. What's this mean about ethics? I would argue it's unethical not to look at technologies that have a very clear human benefit. And this is the balance of the AI discussion around ethics. It's not just what can it do, what are the negatives, what are the unforeseen consequences. The other side of that puzzle is, what if we don't use it? What happens to female mortality as demand continues to skyrocket? What happens to clinical workloads as they get put under more and more pressure? So it makes for an interesting ethics discussion.
Yes.
You can be overly cautious and never get the benefit of that. That would, I would argue, be a really bad ethics decision. With anything new, there's always risks. But in some situations, there's even greater risks doing nothing.
Yeah.
So health is a really good example, because particularly with imagery and health, AI lends itself to that application really well. You may have heard the term intelligent assistant used. I really like the term. A colleague of mine came up with it, Tom Soderstrom, when we were presenting at the Game Changers conference quite some years ago, about 5 years ago. So we wanted to put AI in a positive light and use the examples. And we found, even in the use, not just at NASA but other industries that we're involved in, AI has to be appealing and accepting by people on day one. So often AI can be seen as this rogue machine in a corner, unconstrained, doing something. Not really the truth, and not really the way you want to manage AI. So the IA, the intelligence assistant, which is a nice PR word for AI, tries to enforce the blend of technology and people, the people oversight. And the two together, very similar to the breast screening cancer detection example, is what will create positive change, not the two apart.
Yeah.
And taking the first simple steps, a little bit like NASA's landing of Perseverance only a few weeks ago. Very small technology, important technology, not a complex technology necessarily, but created a lot of benefit to removing risk out of that landing and out of that mission. I think the same is true for our first steps of practical use of AI. What are the things that are simple and easy and have a high degree of success, as a technology, but more so as a human technology symbiotic relationship? Not solving world peace, but simple things we can do now. Why is that important? Well, for the ethical conversation to be put in a good context, human nature is, whether you're in corporate or in your own businesses or in your own personal life, the success really breeds success. So the first forays of a company or of a government using AI really have to be guaranteed successes, which is a little bit contradictory to the fail fast movement. But once you have a success, you then have confidence, you then have trust. And those first steps allow you to take the next one and the next one. And I think that's the path around AI development. It's definitely the path we use in all of the organizations I'm involved in. To create trust, but also move at a pace you can cope with, and only go so far to ensure you can stop and assess your learnings to take an even better step after that. So that's a very different ethical arrangement than probably a lot of other IT ethics issues, which don't really need to be that holistic in nature necessarily.
I like the point that you raised, that just because you put too much focus on ethics doesn't mean that it's good ethics. Stopping something or not doing it at all can have bad impacts on people as well.
And if your view around the opportunity is to first start from a negative position, what are the bad things that can happen with AI? you don't have any room for the good things.
Yeah.
So your ethical discussion becomes very one-weighted to the bad side. And unfortunately, the bad things are always the ones that emerge first with any groundbreaking new technology, typically. So it's a tactical view of AI, looking at the negatives, but it's not a very strategic view. So if I look at a definition of AI, there's lots of definitions of AI.
Yeah.
The one that I quite like, which a intern at JPL came up with, it's not my idea, was that the definition of AI is a learning environment involving people and technology that allow the undoable and even the unimaginable to be achieved for both positive and malicious purposes. And the reason I like that definition is it's got nothing to do with machine learning. It's got nothing to do with quantum computing. It's got nothing to do with neural networks. It's got everything to do around how can people adopt a new technology and continue to adopt it for good.
Yeah.
But the malicious aspects are just as powerful.
True.
So the good and the bad have to be seen as the same coin.
Together. No, awesome. Thank you. I think like I can go on and on and have this like never-ending conversation with you on this. So as one of the last questions I want to ask is there any project or any kind of technological development happening right now, whether in your space or outside, something you might have seen or heard from that kind of concerns you and you have questions about?
Oh, there's a lot.
Yeah.
Particular projects I couldn't really identify, to be honest. I think the environment of social media codifying people's lives, where the security of that information is not terribly secure nor clear, presents a minefield of problems, some of which we can't even imagine at the moment. I think Cambridge Analytica was an insight to that. The projects predominantly with public data. We don't see a lot of this. There's a couple in Eastern Europe that we've bumped into. Those projects that are far-reaching in its goals concern me, because it's a technology that will move fast. So if you're looking at a 5-year AI project, I would argue that's fairly mad, because you don't know what the technology is really going to look like in 5 years. When I look back 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined we'd be in the position we are now.
True.
So the pace is going to move quite quickly. So projects that are too ambitious, I think, would be very hard to control. Shorter term projects looking at what makes a material, tangible benefit right now that can be implemented within a year, or if it's public data, given the privacy concerns around that, 2 years, projects of much more confidence can be managed, and where those benefits are so directly tangible to helping people, not just making money, but helping people, then I think you've got a compelling reason to act. You've got something controllable, and that time frame of 1 to 2 years means you can understand the trajectory of technology in that time. So I look at things I'm worried about, and a number of ethics boards that I'm on, more around what is the scope, what is the groundwork the project's sitting on, and where can things come unstuck.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Anything you would like to add?
Probably the last thing I'd really add, it's very easy to be sucked into the risks of AI, and I think we'll see this more over the next couple of years. The conversations I see inspire people, not just myself, but some of the people that I work with in a range of forums, is where we can find a problem that has a direct opportunity to be solved with AI. I think New Zealand in particular is in an incredible position around AI development, particularly in the public sector. We are small, we have amazing data sets, we have a strong innovation culture, and we have really good talent in this country. If we can promote that talent, if we can expand that talent, we've got all of the attributes to be a strong AI global leader. We just need to do it. I think we're far away from doing it, apart from really good organisations that are making some great inroads in isolation. I think just as we look at the primary sector, the tourism sector, COVID will pass eventually. I think AI data and insights through data as a data-driven economy is an area that we have, I think, good opportunities in. Early days for us. Be interesting to see if we can seize those over time.
Yeah, it would be. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. Lots of great stuff. I will make sure to include links in the bio for anything that I haven't previously covered in my channel, or if I have, and you might want to relook at it again. Please let me know if you have any questions for me or for Glen. And remember, technology can be fun, fashionable, and fabulous.